All right, you're listening to Hawke Talk. I'm here today with Jane Goodall. How are you?
I'm absolutely fine, thank you.
Great to hear. So, I think the common assumption would be the day you're born, you look around the hospital and you're like, I don't really want to be here. I'd rather be out with the chimps and the animals and get me out of here. And that it just started from day one, correct?
I wish I knew what I thought at day one. If we could think that, wow, that would be a breakthrough. Fantastic. I've no
Yeah.
idea what I thought when I was day one.
And so tell me more about like what was the environment you were born into? Like what did your parents do? Where are you from? All those.
Well, I was born in London in
Mhm.
a hospital, and I was only not quite 5 years old when the war broke out.
Uh-huh.
And up until that time, we had a little house in London. When war broke out, mum, me, and my sister moved to Bournemouth from where I'm speaking now. It's in
Wow.
the middle of the south coast on by the sea in England.
Yep.
And that's basically where I grew up, where I spend hours and hours and hours outside watching the birds, the squirrels, the insects, everything about nature, right from the beginning.
And I was going to ask, do you like so as early as you can remember, were you fascinated by nature? Or was it just like the 3, 4, 5 year old years? I guess five when you moved
No,
down there.
I hear from my mother the stories of my childhood. First of all, I was only 1.5 years old when I took a whole lot of wriggly earthworms to bed with me. And my mother came up to say goodnight. I don't remember this, she told me.
Yeah.
And she said, Jane, you were looking at those worms so intently. I think you must have been wondering, how do they walk without legs? And,
Yeah.
so I was so lucky to have a supportive mother. Many mothers would have said, "Ah, you brought all these dirty worms and earth into your bed, and being angry." But she just saw that I was fascinated. And it was the
Yeah.
same when I was 4.5 years old, and she took me for a little holiday onto a farm, a proper farm, not one of these intensive animal farms in the country, because at that point we were living in London, not many animals there. Now I was meeting cows, pigs, horses, chickens. I mean, I was in my element, and I was given the job of collecting hens' eggs. They had little
Yeah.
uh, hen houses where they also slept at night, keep them safe from foxes. And there were little, on the outside of the house, there was a little box with a lid, and so
Yeah.
I would go around, and if there were eggs in this little box, I would put them in my basket. And apparently, I began asking everybody, but where's the hole on the hen big enough for the egg to come out? And nobody told me. So, what I distinctly remember, a hen, she was brown, and she was going into this hen house. And I must have thought, she's going to lay an egg. So I crawled after her. Big mistake, squawks of fear, she flew out. But now
Yeah.
I'm on the path of discovery. I'm going to find out for myself. So I go into an empty hen house, and apparently I waited for about 4 hours, and nobody knew where I was, and they were about to call the police because it was getting dusk. And suddenly I emerged, rushing towards the house, all covered in straw, and again, my mother met me, and she could have so easily said, "How dare you go off without telling us? Where have you been? Don't dare do it again," which would have
Yeah.
killed the excitement. But instead,
Yeah.
she saw my shining eyes and sat down to hear the wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg.
And where do you think that curiosity came from? Like, is it just, do you think all kids have that naturally and you were in an environment and allowed to thrive? Like, why were you, I mean, most 4.5 year olds are not sitting for 4 hours to try to figure out a question they're curious about.
Yeah, well, I think most 4.5-year-olds wouldn't do that, but, it was
Right.
born into me. And
Yeah.
if you think about it, that was the making of a little scientist, asking questions, not
Right.
getting the right answer, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. And a
Yep.
different kind of mother might have crushed that early scientific curiosity, and I might
Yep.
not have done what I've done.
Yep. And did you mentioned the war? Did the war have any effect on you at all, or did you went to Bournemouth and lived your life and didn't really know much of it?
It had a huge effect. For one thing, a lot of Americans came with their tanks, and they were right outside our road, our little road, on their way over to France. And
Mhm.
there was one who was the grandson of a friend that my grandfather had when he went to America in pursuit of a
Huh.
degree at Yale. And so this young man, Jack, came in several times while they were camped there waiting to go to their death. They all went to their death, and I knew that when he
Wow.
died. And then the end of the war, I was 9, and pictures of the Holocaust, the bodies piled up, I mean, it totally shocked me. And I remember climbing up into my favorite tree in the garden here and just thinking I've come face to face with human evil for the first time.
Mhm. And are you still living at the same place you grew up in?
Yes, this is exactly where I was, and my
Wow.
sister lives here permanently, and I'm
Uh-huh.
here between tours a week at a time. This has been
Yeah.
10 days since I got back from Latin America before I come
Uh-huh.
to North America, and that's how it is the whole year.
Yeah. Very nice. And so, 9 years old, you have this experience, and so you were growing up on this farm. You mentioned something to me offline or before this podcast about your favorite animals and the assumption that everyone would think your favorite animal is a chimp because of what you're most famous for. But where did you originally get your love for animals? You said you kind of discovered the humanity in them or the connection with them. I think I forgot the exact word you used.
I was born with the love for animals. I was born wanting to spend time outside, watching the spiders and everything. But then, my teacher as a child, who enabled me to confront the professors at Cambridge, who told me after I'd been with the chimps 2 years that I couldn't talk about chimpanzees having personalities, minds, or emotions. And the reason I was able to stand up to them was because of my childhood teacher. And that
Yeah.
teacher was my dog,
Yeah.
Rusty. And he's here behind me. I think he's, yes, here he is. This is my dog. I'll show him to you, Rusty. And
Oh, awesome.
he, he taught me that, of course, animals have personalities, minds, and emotions.
Yep.
So dogs are
And
my
I feel like
favorite.
anyone that owns a dog would know that.
Yeah, anybody with a dog or a
um,
cat or a guinea pig or a horse,
yep.
I don't even believe the professors who told me that believed it themselves. It's just they couldn't prove it.
Got it. Yeah. Well, I think again, when you have, I don't know what the dog ownership percentages were back then, but now half the United States has dogs. And I think every one of them would attest that their dogs have personalities and emotions and all those things. And so, as you're growing up, when did you start to think that maybe you would pursue this as like a life calling, that you would work with animals? Like, a lot of kids at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 start saying things like, I want to work with animals or I want to be a veterinarian. Not an uncommon statement. Not all of them see it through, but when did that start for you?
I was 10 years old when
Yeah.
okay, this was still right at the end of the war. And we had very, very little money. Books came from the library, but I used to save up. I think I got about 5p pocket money a week, and I'd save and save and save. And I found this little secondhand bookshop, and I used to spend Saturday afternoons. And on this one day, I found this little book, and it was a very cheap edition, Tarzan of the Apes. And remember, back then there was no TV, no Johnny
Yeah.
Weissmuller. There was this little book, and I took it up my favorite tree, which is in the garden out there, and I read it, and I fell passionately in love with this glorious Lord of the Jungle. Little girls of 10 can be very,
Yeah.
very romantic. Of course, I got really peeved because what did Tarzan do? He married the wrong Jane, and I was really jealous. Anyway, I knew there wasn't a Tarzan, but that was when my dream began. I will grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. No thought of being a scientist. Girls didn't
Yeah.
do that. And
Yeah.
everybody laughed at me. How will you get there? You don't have money. It's far away. And you're just a girl, but not mum. And what she said to me, I say to young people, particularly in disadvantaged communities all around the world, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity. And then if you don't give up, hopefully you find a way.
I love that, and it is amazing how much the people we admire around us can shape that. Like you keep referring back to your mother, and what I've seen, over the years of doing these interviews, is how much There's studies that I've seen recently talking about how parents don't have a large effect on how their kids turn out. And I just don't buy it. I think that it is
Yeah,
so much about your
yeah,
parents and how
so
you
much.
turn out, and so through from 10 to like at what point did you start really pursuing this? You have sort of your teenage years. Were you still studying? Were you doing other experiments like the hen laying the egg one? Like what were you doing during that period?
I left school at 18. I did super well at
Okay.
school. I came
Okay.
second or third in just about every exam except math, which I hated. Um, and when I left school, all my friends went off to university, but we couldn't afford it. In the UK
Mhm.
at that time, you had to be really good in a foreign language, and I wasn't, to get a scholarship. So I had to get
Got
a
it.
job. We had just enough for a secretarial training, so I did that. I got a
Yeah.
job in London, which actually was with documentary films. So I learned all about making films, which was really
Mhm.
useful. And then I got
Yeah.
a letter from a school friend inviting me to Kenya, where her parents had just bought a farm. So,
Huh.
of course, yes, there's the opportunity, but couldn't save money in London. So went home here and found a
Mhm.
job in a hotel just around the corner and as a waitress. And it was very
Uh-huh.
hard work because were people down from up north after the war and they wanted a week's holiday by the seaside. So you had to be really nice. I had 5 tables that were mine, and you had to be really nice to the people for a whole week of their holiday. I made
Yeah.
sure that they all knew I was saving up for Africa. So even though they weren't very wealthy, they probably gave me larger tips than I would have had
Yeah.
otherwise. And it
And
took
how
about
long did it
6 months to
yeah.
save up the money, but
How long?
finally
Sorry.
I had enough.
About how long? I missed that.
But it was 5 to 6 months
Yeah.
before I had enough.
And
I had to do an extra month because by then, there weren't any cheap planes flying back and forth. Weren't many planes at all. So I had to go by boat, and
uh
just before I was about to go on the boat, uh, the Suez Canal was closed. So if you know your geography,
Yep.
from London, you should go through the Suez Canal and
Yep.
down to Mombasa. But because of a war with Britain and Egypt, Suez Canal was closed. So I had to go all the way around and round the Cape and up. And it took a bit of extra money. So I had to spend one more month at the hotel to
What year was
get.
that? 1948 or what year was that?
No, that was 1956.
56. Got it.
Yeah.
So you went all the way down around Cape Horn?
Yes, down Cape
Wow.
Town, Cape
Yep.
Town.
Yep.
The thing was the first place I set foot on African soil was Cape Town, and I was so excited, and there were natives in their, traditional costumes. I didn't know it was for tourism. How would I? I was very naive, and I my mother had 2 friends there, and they'd said, "Don't worry about Jane, we'll look after her for the 2 days the ship is in dock." And they took me around, and I was so excited. And then I kept noticing these words in Afrikaans on the doors to the hotels and the restaurants and all over the place. And I said, "What do these words mean?" "White people only." And I wasn't brought up that way. My grandfather
Yep.
was a congregational minister, and we didn't judge people by the color of their skin or their language, but by who they were as people. So I couldn't wait to leave Cape Town.
Yeah. Yeah, that was part of apartheid down there. And so you land in Kenya. And at this point, you're just 18 and a half, or how old are you?
No, because I my mother had
Oh, because you
also
did
sent me for half a year, well, not sent me, but allowed me to go for half a year to stay with a family in Germany whose
uh-huh.
the parents wanted somebody to teach the children English. And my mother wanted me to go because she said, "Jane, I want you to understand that Nazis are not the same as Germans." And so I met wonderful people, and some of my best friends now are Germans. So,
So
the
to pause on that for a sec, where did your mom get all this from? Was she
well,
just brought up really well too? This is like she seems so insightful.
she was I was so lucky to have a mother like that. I think a lot of it came from her father, the
Mhm.
congregational minister, and her
Yeah,
mother, my grandmother. My goodness, she looked after 4 children. She, was left bankrupt basically when her husband, died, and she
yeah,
somehow had she started a little, um, convalescent home. You wouldn't be allowed to today, but for people who came out of hospital, and
yeah.
made a living that way. But my poor mother, she'd been going to college to do, art, but because her father died, there was no money, so she couldn't go. She did secretarial like me.
Got it. And so how old were you when you landed in Kenya then? Because you did some time
How
in
old was
London,
that?
some time in Germany?
When I first went to Africa, I was, let's see, 23. My first boat trip
Okay.
to Africa. I was but a 23-year-old back then. I mean, girls weren't going off traveling like they are today. So I would say I was
Yeah.
probably like a 17, 18-year-old today.
Yeah. And so when you landed, was it I mean, you had this dream of landing in Africa. Was South Africa did it feel like fulfilling that dream until the sort of racism undertone? But when you landed in Kenya, was it like I made it? What was that feeling?
Yeah. I went from Mombasa by train to Kenya. I was met by my
Yeah.
school friend, taken to her farm, and when I woke up the next morning, there was my friend saying, "Look out of the window," and there were the paw prints of a big male leopard. Yes, I've arrived. It was the
Wow.
most amazing feeling. I'm really now in Africa.
Yep. And
And then
how long did
I
you
I heard about Louis Leakey and went to visit him. And he took me all around the museum, the Natural History Museum. And, uh, I told you I did that boring secretarial course.
Yeah.
Leakey had just lost his secretary. And so there I was. And now I was surrounded by all the people who could answer my questions about the mammals and the birds and the reptiles, the insects, the plants of East Africa. It was heaven.
And so you took the secretary job?
Yes,
And
and
how long were
then
you there for, this first trip?
I
Yeah, go
was
ahead.
his secretary for a year, and
Uh-huh.
during it, every summer at that time, he used to go to Olduvai Gorge, which is a place where paleontologists hunt for fossils in the middle of the
Mhm.
Serengeti Plains. And at that time, no human fossils had been found. And so it was a very small expedition. It was Leakey, his wife, one other young English girl, and fortunately, I was allowed to join them, and then a few Kenyans to help with, cooking and so on. And for 3 whole months, I was on the Serengeti Plains, which nobody will ever see again. Animals everywhere. Animals
Yeah,
everywhere. And for 3 months, all we saw of other humans were 4 Maasai warriors. That was it. And
yeah,
that it was just us with tents and animals, animals, animals. And I met a rhino and I met a lion just on foot. And I think it was the day I met the lion. And Nikki said I reacted just right. And that's when he began talking to me about a group of chimps in Tanzania on a lake shore.
huh. And what was reacting just right to the lion?
Well, it was a funny story actually, because Jillian and I, the other young girl, we'd been asked by Leakey's wife to take her two precious dogs on our walk, which we were allowed to do every evening after the hard day's work. And these were two Dalmatians, and one of them, Toots, was champion of all breeds of Kenya, Mary Leakey's pride and joy. And there were no leads. We were just told, take the dogs. So we took the dogs. We're walking along the bottom of the gorge, and suddenly a tiny mouse runs across the road. So the two dogs see the mouse rush under the vegetation. And so we're standing there, and something made me look behind me. And there behind was a young male lion, about 2 years old, mane just
Wow.
sprouting on his shoulders. And I think he was curious. His tail was just moving gently, not lashing. And
Yep.
Gillian said, "Oh, we must go into the vegetation and hide." And I said, "Don't be silly. The lion will know where we are, but we won't have a clue where the lion is." And so I said, "We have to climb up onto the plains, up this side of the gorge." Well, fine, but the two dogs still under the bushes after the mouse. I said, "We can't go without the dogs." So we called the names of Toots and Bottom Biter. Toots, Bottom Biter. Finally, they come. We attach them to belts or something. We climb up. By this time, we don't know where the lion is. For some bizarre reason, Gillian lets go of Toots, champion of all breeds of Kenya, Mary Leakey's pride and joy, and she runs back to the mouse. I said to Gillian, "I'd rather face the lion than Mary Leakey. We go back without Toots." So we called, and no Toots. And I'm literally just about to go down to look for her. And thank goodness she comes back. But it was that evening around the campfire that Leakey began talking about these chimps.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, obviously, as you said, you didn't have a specific fascination with chimps from the beginning. It was just animals in general. What was it about him talking about the chimps that made you interested, intrigued? What was it about them?
Honestly, I would have studied any animal. Leakey was giving me an opportunity to study the one most like us.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have cared what he offered me. I just wanted to be out in the wild with animals. And
got it.
I don't know if it was meant. I sometimes feel my whole life's course has been meant to be, but I got the one most like us. The one that,
Yeah.
you know, because of what I discovered, changed scientific attitude to non-human animals.
And so, how soon did you venture off to the chimps? Like once he talked to you about this, did you immediately pack up and go?
I would have packed up and gone, but it took a year, one, to get the money. I mean,
Yeah,
who is this girl? She hasn't even got a degree. She hasn't been to college. And finally,
yeah.
we got 6 months, or Leakey got 6 months from an American philanthropist. Secondly, uh, back then, Tanzania was Tanganyika, and it was a British
Mhm.
protectorate. And the British authorities said, "A young girl in the forest? Absolutely no." But Leakey never gave up. So in the end, they said, "All right, she can come, but only with if she brings somebody with her." So who volunteered to come? That same amazing mother. And so
Oh, really?
it was a year from when Leakey began talking to me until I actually got to Gombe in July 1960.
Got it. And with the plan of being there for 6 months, that was the original.
Well, that's all the money we had. And
Right.
afterwards, Leakey said he thought I might be there for 10 years. And if somebody had asked me at that time, I would have said, well, maybe 3 years. But of course,
Yeah.
the study is now over 60 years old.
Yeah. And so, what did you realize those first 6 months? Tell me more about that. You land with these chimps, and obviously you're intrigued, you're excited, you have your first real opportunity in this. But what was that experience like?
It was awful because for
Yeah,
4 of those 6 months, the chimps took one look at me and vanished into the forest. And that's where my mother played a really important role because I found this peak, and from it, I could look with my binoculars into two valleys with just a short walk. And when I got back depressed because, the chimps have disappeared again, She said, "But Jane, you're learning more than you think. Up from that peak, you're learning about how they build sleeping platforms, nests at night, bending over the branches. You're learning about the foods they eat. You're learning about the calls they make. You're learning how sometimes they travel alone. Sometimes it's a mother with her kids. Sometimes two mothers, kids playing. Sometimes a group of males hanging out. And sometimes all the members, what we now know is a community of about 50, coming together with lots of excitement because a new food has become ripe."
And so you said that was 4 months. Did you have I mean, there's a pattern here of you having the ability to really stick with things longer than most people would, especially these days, where from 4 hours in a hen coop to 6 months of saving up to take a boat trip to Africa by yourself to now spending 4 months in the jungle without really being able to make contact. Like, what caused you to always push through? Did you just not worry about what was coming and just stayed in the moment? Or did you just have full commitment and didn't matter? You weren't going to fail? Like, where did that come from?
Oh, I don't know where it came from, but it was basically being obstinate. I'm not giving up. I mean,
Yeah.
I won't give up. Maybe the money will run out and I'll have to, but until it does, I am not giving up. And that was probably part of the family I was born into. Probably
Mhm.
partly the war, because there was a time in the war in Britain when the whole of Europe had either been overrun or capitulated, like France, and Britain stood
Yep.
alone. And it was inevitable, really, if you look back, that we would have been, the Germans would have taken over Britain. But we had Churchill, and we
Yep.
had Churchill with his famous speeches, we will never give up. And I
Yep.
think that somehow made a deep impression on me. We mustn't give up. We will prevail.
Love that. And so when was the turning point? Was there a point where a chimp all of a sudden was okay with you being there because they had seen you for 4 months? Like
Yeah,
what?
it was a
Yeah.
little bit gradual, but one chimp, David Greybeard, and they often travel alone. So I realized he was letting me get a little bit closer. Not too close, but a little bit closer. And
Yeah.
on this one day, as I'm feeling a bit depressed, my mother has just had to leave, and it was raining and I was cold. And then suddenly I saw this dark shape on a termite mound. And with my binoculars, I could see a hand reach out and break off a grass stem and scratch at the surface of the termite mound, uncovering a tunnel, pushing the straw in and eating off the termites. And then I saw him break off a leafy twig, and to make that into a tool, he had to carefully remove the leaves. And at that time, science had determined humans and only humans used and made tools. We were defined as man, the tool maker. So when I sent
Yeah.
this telegram to Leakey, he sent his famous telegram back, which everybody has said, "Don't you have that telegram?" No. But he said, "Now we must redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as humans, because we were defined as man, the tool maker, by science."
I love that. That's amazing. And how did that feel? Like when you got that telegram, did you feel how impactful that discovery was? Did you know how big that was at the time?
Well, what I knew was that that discovery interested the National Geographic Society in the US, and that because of that discovery, they agreed to continue funding the research when that little 6 months money ran out. So that was all tied up together. And the
Yeah.
most exciting thing for me was that I could continue just as I was getting there. I could carry on with the
Yeah.
research.
And so at that point, did those start to feel right? You were going to stay there for 3 to 10 years. Like you knew, like, I'm here, I'm home, I'm sticking this out. Is that how that felt at that point?
I'm not sure I thought about the future. I was really very concentrated on the present and,
Hmm.
using this new money to do the very best I could. And I was always conscious of not wanting to let Louis Leakey down because he stuck his neck out. And
Yeah.
So it was just gradually David Graybeard helped because I would approach a group which was ready to run, and if David was there, sitting calmly, they would look from him to me and back, and I suppose they were thinking, "Well, she can't be so dangerous after all." Because David, he wasn't the top-ranking male, but in a way he was a leader because the other chimps, I mean, the young ones, if they got scared, they would run to David, and he would reassure them and pet them. And best friend was the top-ranking alpha male, and if he got a bit concerned, he would run and David would embrace him. So David was like Rusty. It was Rusty, the dog, and David
Yeah.
Graybeard, the chimp, and they were my 2 mentors, really.
And how many years did you spend with David Graybeard?
David David actually died in an epidemic in 1986.
Oh, so
19
that was
sorry, 1968. But
oh,
by
okay.
then, I knew the other chimps, I'd named them. They were literally like part of my family. And
Yeah.
so, well, I've written about them. In fact, the very best book that I've written about the chimps for their personalities is called Through a Window. And
I'll
I
definitely have to
read
check
that
that
book.
out.
I am so nostalgic when I read that book. I'm there with. I mean, they were like my family. I knew them so, so, so well.
And how long did it take for, as you said, they looked to David Graybeard for reassurance that you were safe. How long, when did that start happening? Was that a year into spending time out there? Or how long did it take before you were able to really start making connections with the rest of the chimps?
David, I saw using tools 4 months into the study. David
Yeah.
began letting me follow him after, I would say, 9, 10 months. And
Okay.
then gradually, he led me into his whole community. And by the way, this is him back here.
Yeah.
It's a picture of David Graybeard. That's him. Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, he was beautiful,
And
handsome, calm, gentle, and he was a real friend. I mean, he let me groom him eventually, and,
how long did
he
that take to
always
like get to that point that you could groom them? Like how many was that, a year and a half in? How long did it take for them to warm up?
well, f to get really close, yeah, about 1.5 years.
Yeah. A lot of patience, but it's amazing. I mean, obviously the outcome's incredible and changed our entire knowledge of the world, but you spent a year and a half in the jungle waiting to the point where you could actually make physical contact. Like I just it again, it resonates because I feel like almost nobody has patience like that these days. And the fact that you like really just stuck with it and were steadfast. And I'm sure again it was fascinating and engaging and rough at the same time. You were able to break through this barrier that took real time.
It was magic. For me, it was magic, and then
Yeah.
after I got, allowed into the community, as it were, they were the best days of my life, but it was after I'd been with the chimps about 1.5 years, that's when Leakey told me I had to go and get a degree. He said, "I
Uh-huh.
picked you because you didn't have a mind that was biased by the very reductionist attitude of science to animals at that time. But now I want science to take you seriously, so you have to get a degree. There's no time for an undergraduate degree. I've got you a place in Cambridge University in the UK to do a degree in ethology." I didn't even know what ethology meant. There was no email at that time. Of course, it means
Yeah.
animal behavior. So when I got there, you can imagine I was nervous. I mean, I'd never been to college. I could imagine
Yeah.
all the students thinking, huh, who does she think she is just because she studied chimpanzees? I don't know if they thought that or not. They probably did. But then when the erudite professors told me I'd done everything wrong, that I shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names, that wasn't scientific, they should have had numbers, and I couldn't talk about their personality, their minds, or their emotions because those were unique to humans. And that's when the dog Rusty just boosted my feeling that I knew better than they did.
Yeah. And how did that go? I mean, I was definitely someone that liked to argue with my professors in college too. Were you pushing right back and saying, "Nope, you don't know what you're talking about. I've spent time there. This
No,
was the right thing," or
no, that's never been my way. I never do that. I just quietly
yeah,
went on talking about chimps the way they are, showing pictures, and then the Geographic sent Hugo van Lawick, who became my first husband, to take
uh-huh,
film, and his film began going around the world. And science gradually itself changed. Although
yeah,
there's still scientists today and people doing nasty things to animals who maintain that old ridiculous belief that animals, or not belief, because I don't believe they believe it, but what they say
yeah.
is that animals don't have personalities, minds, or emotions, which you know as well as I know is rubbish.
Yeah, it's I mean, as you said, even it's funny, I had a pet guinea pig growing up too. When you said guinea pigs as well, it's like I had a guinea pig that would follow me around the house and actually would crawl up and lick my face. Like it was this loving little guinea pig that I like acted like a dog, which again, I say that because dogs have personalities. I've had dogs my entire life. It's great.
No,
It's, again, if you've been around these animals, you can't say they don't have personalities.
no, and I mean, now we're knowing so much about animal intellect. So it's
Yep.
not just chimpanzees, apes, elephants, whales. It's now what we learn about rats, what we learn about pigs,
Hmm.
um, certainly dogs, and now
Yep.
the octopus. You've seen my octopus teacher, right?
Yep.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
and now we know that bees can be trained to do a little trick. And other bees who
Really?
have not been trained can do the same thing just by watching the trained bees.
Wow.
Yes, it
So
is
yeah,
wild,
it's
isn't it?
it is. It really is, and it's in a good way. Like it's incredible to know that. I actually don't like a world where we're the only species that has these abilities to use tools to have personalities. Like I'd much rather live in a world that. I mean, we all watch whether it's Doctor Dolittle or some of these shows and movies where they anthropomorphize animals, and we all love that fantasy. And the fact is, it's partially there. Um,
Absolutely.
so
And that's the world we
yeah,
live in. We now know
yeah,
that a lot of these things that I believed in as a child, and you probably did too, are actually true.
yep,
It's proven.
yep. Now that's amazing. And so you went to university. How long did you go to university for, to Cambridge?
Oh, I took because because I had to every summer, I had to go back to the chimps to follow what they were doing, and so I took
Yep.
you only allowed 5 years. So I took the whole 5 years because I was going back and
Yep.
forth like this.
And were you still taking the same boat around the down through
No,
Cape
I
Town?
was flying by then.
Okay.
I
And
couldn't have
so
done it by boat because that took well, going around the Cape, it took nearly a month.
it did. Wow. And so you were going back, and how was like would you come back, and how long did it take the chimps to like welcome you back? Did they remember you immediately and it was like, "Oh, you're back."
Immediately. It
Wow.
almost seemed that they'd been thinking about me while I was away, so they were even more accepting of me.
That's amazing. What did that happen the first time? Like that first trip back? They were like it was just a welcome back kind of thing?
It wasn't a welcome, but it was, "Oh, here you are again. Okay."
So it wasn't like going back to dogs, the excitement, the tail wagging. Oh, you're
Yeah,
back. I couldn't wait to see you again. It was more like, oh, look who it is.
yeah, that's it. She's back again.
Yeah. Nice. And through that, your studies, did you start to get more along with your professors? Did they start to hear you more? Or did you just kind of get through your schooling and never really connected with the professors there?
Sorry.
Wait, no, no worries. I was saying, like, did you get you? It sounded like you had a lot of friction with your professors early on. Did that ever shift, or did it just last through your entire 5 years of they didn't really agree with your methods, they weren't going to come around, and you got through
Oh,
your schooling? Was it like did you make was there camaraderie there or not?
the scientists, definitely came round and accepted, the way chimps are, and I was really lucky. I had an
Yep,
amazing supervisor. At first, he was my sternest critic. And then he
yep,
came to Gombe and he wrote to me and he said, Jane, in those 2 weeks, I learned more about animal behavior than in the rest of my life. And so he
wow,
then helped me to express the way I felt in a way that I couldn't be criticized by my scientific colleagues. And, a perfect example, the old female Flo, she had a daughter, Fifi. And when Fifi was 5, a new baby was born. And Fifi was, oh, she wanted to touch the baby. She was protective. If another infant came up, she chased her away. And so I'd written in my naive way, Fifi was jealous. And Robert Hine, my supervisor, said, "You can't say that. You can't prove it." I said, "No, I can't prove it, but I'm sure she was. So what shall I say?" And he said, and I've shared this with students all around the world, Fifi behaved in such a way that if she'd been a human child, we would say she was jealous.
Love
That's
that.
extremely clever,
Yeah.
playing
No,
with
that is
words.
very clever.
Yeah.
You can't debate that one.
No, you can't.
That's great. And by the way, what was your like living situation with the chimps? Did you have a tent or what were you how were you sleeping and getting by for those months at a time?
Well, originally, Mum and I had one ex-army tent to share, and then
Uh-huh.
Hugo came and he had a tent, and then
Mhm.
then I brought in 1 or 2 young people to help collect the data, and so we got these uniports, you can put them up,
Mhm.
metal roof,
Yeah.
and those have all gone now. We have some permanent buildings on site for the
Oh, yeah.
research,
Got it.
Gombe, yeah.
And how far is that from where the chimps sleep?
No, it's in the middle of the national park. It's right national
Right.
park
But like
is on the edge of the lake, Lake Tanganyika, and so these
uh,
buildings are right down on the shore of
got
the
it.
lake, and the chimps are all up behind.
Yeah. About how far is it? 10-minute walk away or what is the distance to where the chimps sleep?
Well, the chimps sometimes
Or
come
they
down to the beach. Sometimes the
Yeah.
chimps can be way high up in the escarpment, and it would be a
Uh-huh.
2-hour trek to get up there.
Got it. And so over the years of going back and forth, like you get out with your degree and then is that when you started setting up sort of a permanent base or like what happened post graduation? Leakey said that he wanted you to finish that degree. What did that open up for you?
Well, then, having got the degree, gradually built up this little research station and,
Yeah.
brought in students from different universities. Never many because the reserve is very small, the park is very small. And but after getting my degree, they were the best days of my life. I could be out in the rainforest with the chimps or even without them, understanding the interrelationship of all living things, the composition of the ecosystem. And so people always say, well, why did you leave? Because I realized that around Africa, chimpanzee numbers were dropping, forests were being destroyed, the bushmeat trade was growing. That's the commercial hunting of wild animals for food. Infant chimpanzees, well, their mothers were shot and they were being stolen to sell around the world. In those days, medical research, but also pets and zoos and circuses. And so I left
Mhm.
because I knew I had to do something. Didn't know what to do, but I just knew chimps gave me so much. I had to do something for them.
A-
That was in
And so
19.
what did you
So what did I
1986 you said?
well, the worst part, in a way, was going into the medical research labs and seeing our closest relatives, 5 foot by 5 foot cages, maybe alone for 30 years, seeing nothing but people in white coats coming to take blood or something like that. They're because they share 98.7% of our DNA, and unlike other animals, they can be infected with and catch diseases that other animals are not able to catch because they're less like us. And I don't think I've ever been through such traumatic times as when I was allowed into some of these labs. And, again, I didn't attack the people. I just showed them video of how the chimps are in nature. And I could see that they were just beginning to think about what they were doing. And then I discovered half of them had never seen even a chimp in a zoo. The scientists just asked for a little vial of blood or serum or something like that. Anyway, took a long, long, long time.
And
Eventually, chimps are no longer in medical research. And it turns out, though they're really like us, nothing that's been done has helped humans in the end.
Yeah.
So that's what I did
And
with the
so
lab.
do you think that comes from a similar place? Just to tie it back to the Holocaust, like your mom mentioned that Germans are not Nazis, but I also, and I'm born and raised Jewish, so like my grandparents were in the Holocaust, etc. It feels like it's not that people are intrinsically evil, but that they can sometimes just not catch context where you're taught, or that this is just how it is, and whether it's, again, Jews or who they were rounding up in the Holocaust, but also when it comes to chimps, they just weren't taught that this is something wrong. Is that did you ever feel like that there was a connection there? Because as you said, the first time you saw evil was that end of the
Yeah.
war.
No, definitely. Just about all the scientists I met, except one or two, knew perfectly well that once they understood the chimp, that they were doing wrong, that what they were doing
Yeah.
wasn't right. That I
Yeah.
knew. But anyway, then I visited. By then there were 6 other groups studying chimps across Africa, so I visited them. I learned a lot about the problems faced by the chimps, why they were decreasing because of habitat loss and so on. But I also learned about the problems faced by so many Africans living in and around chimp habitat. You know,
Yeah.
the crippling poverty, the lack of good health and education, the degradation of the farmland. And so when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, it just came to a head that these people are destroying the environment, cutting down the trees to make land to grow food or money from charcoal or timber. And if we can't help them to find ways of living without destroying the environment, we can't save chimps, forests, or anything else. And that began
Yeah.
the Jane Goodall Institute's program, Takari, which is working with the people so that they can live without destroying the forest.
Yeah. And how has that progressed? How do you feel that has succeeded and or been challenged
Oh,
either way?
we began with the 12 villages around Gombe. Then we moved
Hmm.
into all the villages throughout Chimp Range in Tanzania. And
Hmm.
because we worked with them, because we didn't walk in as a bunch of arrogant white people, "Oh, we're going to help you live better lives," you know. It was
Yeah.
local people, carefully picked team of local people going in and asking the village elders, "What can we do to improve your lives?" So they wanted better
Hmm.
health education, they wanted more food, which meant restoring fertility to the overused farmland without chemicals. And then it gradually,
Yeah.
we could provide water management programs, scholarships to give girls a chance of secondary education,
Yeah.
microfinance, which I believe is amazingly important because if you give somebody
Yeah.
a grant, they use it and put their hand out for more. If you give them a loan for their uh, environmentally sustainable small business, and they pay it
Yeah.
back, they're proud, "It's mine, I did it." Then they can get a
Yeah.
bigger loan. So
Yeah.
basically, throughout that area where we're working, the people understand saving the environment isn't just for wildlife, it's for our future. And so the program is now working in 6 other African countries.
Love that. And so you focused on the environment. This, you said 1986 was when you started focusing on the medical testing on chimps. And then when did you start working with the villages on the environmental side?
That was in, 9 well, it was about the same time actually, because I went back and forth.
Okay.
But it was about we got the first group we started trying to get the money long before we got the money. So the program Takari began in 1994. We started trying to
Okay.
get the money for it in 1990.
Yeah.
So it took a long time because nobody had done anything like that before. So the
And this
first money
question may sound ridiculous as someone as humble as yourself, but when did you feel your name really started to become mainstream? That people, like, you crossed over from the scientific community and the animal community to, like, people knew who Jane Goodall was. When did that start to kick in?
it was very horrifying. It was very terrifying because, I suddenly found that people when I was in an airport would, want a selfie or something or a signature in the beginning. And
Yeah.
I used to put dark glasses on, let my hair down because I'm basically a shy person, and I hated it. But suddenly, at some point, I realized, well, I better make use of
Oh,
this to get people involved in our program. So that's what I did. Went round with little
are you there?
visiting cards and um, and then, of course, especially important for our youth program, Roots and Shoots, which is young people from preschool through
Jane?
university. It's now in 70 countries. The main message is every one of us makes an impact on the planet every single day, and we can choose what sort of impact we make. At a certain point, I realized that this recognition, although I hadn't sought it, I could use it for good. I
Yeah.
could use it to try and involve people to help make the world a better place. And it was when I was traveling the world trying to raise awareness, but also money for research and Takari, that I thought, well, if we're not working with young people who can follow on, then there's no point. So that's when I began the Roots and Shoots program in 1991 with 12 high school students who came to talk to me about problems that they saw in Tanzania and in Dar es Salaam. And so I told them to get their friends who were concerned. We had a meeting of about 30 young people of 17, 18, 19. And that's when our Roots and Shoots program was born with main message every individual makes an impact every single day, and we can choose what sort of impact we make, and that each group, because of understanding how everything is interconnected, that each group would choose, not top down, they would choose 3 projects, 1 to help people, 1 to help animals, 1 to help the environment. And that which began with 12 high school students is now involving young people from kindergarten through university, and it's in 70 countries around the world.
Wow. Do you have a head count, like how many kids have participated in it? Curious, like the scale. Obviously, 70 countries is huge.
Well, I mean, the number of groups, I would say by now it's hundreds of thousands because it began in 1991. And
Yeah.
right now, I think because people are desperate for hope, and Roots and Shoots is all about if you take action, then from despair, you realize you can make a difference. Now that there's
Yeah.
70 countries involved, the young people
Yeah.
are communicating with each other. We bring them together, and they're realizing that together they truly are making a difference. They
Yeah.
really, really are.
Yeah. And so, how often over the past 30 years have you gotten back with the chimps? Like, once you started working on these other causes starting in 1986, how often do you still go back and study and spend time with the chimps?
Not studying them. There's only one left alive that I
Oh,
knew. Ever since 1986, I've been going less and less and less. And, I'm 90 now. I can't climb high up in the hills. And so the chimps are low where I could go and see them. There's tourists. There's Gombe is now run by national parks, and so there are tourists. And I
uh-huh.
don't want to go and see the chimps surrounded by tourists. But last
Yeah.
time I was there, which was 4 months ago, the one chimpanzee who I know from the old days, she actually came to my house and she sort of led me. She had 2 of her youngest offspring. She led me up, up the river into the beautiful, beautiful valley, and it was honestly like, I don't know. I mean, she's 50 something years old now,
Wow.
and I don't know if she'll be around much longer, but it was pure magic. It was pure magic. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, a few more questions for you. Number one, what's next for you? The ripe young age of 90. What do you want for the rest of your life, or what are you looking forward to?
I'm not sure I'm looking forward to anything except the next great adventure will be dying because there's either something or nothing, and if there's something, it'll be a huge adventure. But,
Yeah.
Right now, there's elections all around the world. There seem to
Mhm.
be so many elections. So a campaign, vote for nature. Never mind the party. Just vote for the candidate who you believe will do more to protect the environment for your future. And so that's the campaign I'm
Love
involved
it.
in now.
Yep.
And but at the same time, I'm traveling 300 days a year. I've
Wow.
just got back from Colombia, Argentina, and Chile, and I'm just about to do Canada and America, and after that it will be Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and after that it will be India, and then it will be China, Nepal, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaysia, and that's all before Christmas.
Wow. That is, I thought I had a busy travel schedule, but that is a lot. And so
It's a
you kind of
nightmare. It's a
mentioned that
nightmare.
exactly. It's the end do justify the means, but it's traveling is just wearing, and you do it for decades and decades and decades. I'm sure it gets there, and so you mentioned a little bit of this, and you've worked with so much youth, but for someone that wants to pursue their dreams, I mean, you are someone that I would say above most pursued something that was incredible, that was the path least traveled, that really turned out to be an incredible gift to the world. What would be your advice to a young person or anyone that's looking to pursue their dream?
Well, I would, basically say to them what my mother said to me, which is, if you really want to do this, then you must work really, really hard, take advantage of every opportunity, and don't give up. And then hopefully you get there. But I also say to them, you may find halfway along that you feel this was a mistake and I'd rather do that. And for heaven's sake, don't carry on with what you feel is wrong for you just because you feel you don't want to look silly by changing your mind halfway through. I think that's
I love
really
that.
important. Yeah.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for coming on to Hawk Talk. This has been truly an honor.
Well, it's been lovely talking with you. And by the
Yeah.
way, you should know that the picture I have of you, you've got these
Yeah.
wings flying
Oh,
from
yeah.
your head.
Yeah.
And
That's
it's
very
quite
intentional.
amazing.
We both,
It's quite amazing.
yeah, as you know, we both have a thing for animals. So my company's
Yeah.
based off the red-tailed hawks that used to circle over my house as a
You
kid.
got the red-tailed hawk on your cap, and then you got these
Yep.
red wings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
No, this was painted by an artist in our office live in front of us. It was an amazing
It's
experience.
beautiful. But all I
Thank you.
see are the wings and the tail.
Perfect.
Yeah.